and Omega in heat accidentally ends up in a normal human world. They couldn't even buy an inhibitor at the pharmacy, and even mistook a stranger's cologne for alpha pheromones. Tong Tong lit up seeing Liang Ju at breakfast. Liang Ju works non-stop and hardly has time with him. He dashed to Liang Ju's side. Blushing, he quietly scooted his chair over. He started to say, "Gung," again flushed and changed it to "Did." Holding his coffee, Liang Ju gently said, "Morning, Tong Tong." He told the nanny they'd have dinner back at the old house. Tong Tong had heard from the nanny that after the adoption papers they go meet the family at the old place. He's been with Liang Ju for over 2 years, but he's never met a single one of Liang Ju's relatives. Nervous, he asked, "Are we going to Grandpa's?" Liang Ju set his coffee down with a thud and frowned. "Don't call him Grandpa." Tong Tong looked puzzled. "But I call you Dad, don't I?" Liang Ju didn't explain and urged Tong Tong to get changed or he'd be late for school. Kids get distracted easily. So Tong Tong panicked, chugged his milk and hopped off to change. Just then the assistant texted, saying Mr. Shen had checked out. Liang Ju called back, "Stay on him, see where he goes and who he meets." In the car, Shen Tingwei gave several addresses, and the driver said he'd never heard of any. His heat hadn't passed. His head started throbbing again. Hoarse, he asked, "What city is this?" The driver stared at him, baffled. "This is Pilot Happy, no eh?" Seeing Shen Tingwei still blank-faced. "Sir, are you drunk or what? If you puke in my car, it'll cost you a fortune." Shen Tingwei got out pale. The driver had no idea where he wanted to go, and he'd never heard this city's name before. He stood on an unfamiliar street, watching people rush by, not even sure which way to go. In the conference room, Liang Ju listened to the manager's report, while checking the assistant's updates. By lunch, staff were whispering that Boss Liang might be in love, since it was the first time he texted back meeting. After the meeting, Liang Ju called his assistant, who sounded rattled. Mr. Shen grabbed a cab after checking out, but got out before it left. He kept asking people for directions, but collapsed after a short while. He's still unconscious, and the doctor says it's due to a fever. We drew his blood, but the lab results will take a while, and we couldn't find any ID info on Mr. Shen. Liang Ju wasn't surprised. Guy like that would prep thoroughly before trying to jump into my bed. He called the assistant to keep tracking Shen Tingwei. That night a luxury car rolled up to a standalone villa. Liang Ju got out with Tong Tong. Bodyguards around them bowed. "Evening, young master." Tong Tong stuck close behind Liang Ju, curiously taking everything in. A housekeeper waved at him with a smile. Tong Tong hurriedly looked away and bumped into Liang Ju's back. He grabbed his sore nose, ready to apologize, when Liang Ju turned and glanced at him, resting a calming hand on his shoulder, then nudged him forward. "Say, Mr. Chen." The man on the sofa looked overly stern, so Tong Tong hid behind Liang Ju, peeked out and timidly said, "Hello, Mr. Chen." But he wondered why not Mr. Liang. Chen Chulian sipped his tea. "Kid, come here." Liang Ju patted his back. "Be ye brave." Tong murmured okay, and zombie walked over, arms and legs stiff. He sat rigidly beside Chen Chulian, barely moving. Then Chen Chulian suddenly smiled at him and handed him a handful of pistachios. Tong Tong thought, maybe Mr. Chen isn't that scary. When asked his name, he started with Lion, but Liang Ju cut in. "It's Kan Tong." Chen Chulian stared at him in silence. Tong Tong pressed his lips, disappointed, then lifted his head. "Hello, sir. I'm Kan Tong." Chen Chulian smiled again. "You're a boy. Don't hide behind grown-ups for everything." Tong Tong nodded quickly. "Got it." Liang Ju sat beside him, ruffled his hair, and chatted with Chen Chulian. After a bit, Chen Chulian looked at Liang Ju and said, hinting at something, "Mingshu flies home in 2 days. Did she tell?" Liang Ju paused. "Don't worry, I'll pick her up." And Omega, who scent is like wine, accidentally ends up in human world, but a man mistakes him for a rival's plant sent to seduce him. Tong Tong doesn't get grown-up stuff, so he just sits and waits, trying to be good. But the longer it takes, the sleepier he gets. To stay awake, he starts cracking pistachios. He notices Chen Chulian looking old, and happily offers him the peeled ones. "Want some?" Chen Chulian chuckles and shakes his head. "The kid's well behaved, but he isn't your biological son." The words hit Tong Tong like a lightning strike. His head bust, and the pistachio slipped from his hand onto the floor. Chen Chulian frowned slightly, while Liang Ju stayed calm and gently pulled the boy close. Tong Tong pressed his lips, fighting back tears, and inched closer to Liang Ju. The silence fell, heavy and suffocating. A young, beautiful woman came down the stairs, sat gracefully across from them, and asked, "Are you Tong Tong?" Tong Tong nodded, a bit shy, then glanced at Liang Ju for help. "Mrs. Chen," he quickly added. "Hello, Mrs. Chen." The woman shot Liang Ju a look, annoyed. Chen Chulian muttered with a scowl, "You're the one confusing him, messing up the family hierarchy." She casually tucked her hair behind her ear. "What hierarchy?" Then she smiled warmly at the boy. "Don't tell madam." "Yeah, call me whatever you like." Tong Tong nodded politely fast. At dinner, Tong Tong stared at his steak, zoning out. At home, they usually eat Chinese food, so he's not good with a knife and fork. He tried to be extra careful, but when he cut the steak, the cutlery scraped the plate with a harsh sound. Chulian's face darkened. "So big already and you can't even eat properly." The table fell silent, and Tong Tong jumped, startled. He carefully set down his knife and fork, hands clenched tight under the table, and lowered his head at a loss. Liang Ju looked at the child beside him, quietly clenching his fist. "I've been too busy lately. I haven't had time to teach him." The woman couldn't stand it. "It's dinner. Why scare a kid?" Tong Tong sniffled softly, and someone handed him a napkin. He mumbled, "Dad, I'm not crying." Liang Ju softly rubbed his head again, and passed him the cut-up steak. "Eat up." Then Liang Ju took a sip of red wine, and Tong Tong stared curious. Dad, does your wine taste like my drink? Liang froze for a second and thought of Shen Tingwei, drenched in alcohol that night. He only snapped back when Chen Chulian called his name. Come to my study after dinner. Liang answered, okay. He glanced at the wine again, wondering how that man was doing. After dinner, Tong hugged a pillow and zoned out in the living room. He'd been waiting a long time, not sure when Dad would finish talking business. Half asleep, he heard someone call his name. He turned and said politely, Mrs. Chen. The woman came over and sat beside him. Do I look old? Tong shook his head and said honestly, you look like a big sister. She brightened, pinched his cheek. Such a good boy. He remembered the nanny saying you call a woman with kids auntie. So he asked, do you have kids? She sighed. Shen Chulian would love that. But he's the one not doing his part. Seeing the kid confused, she realized she'd said something not key and awkwardly changed the subject. Was dinner good? Tong smiled. It was good, then slowly lowered his head. She realized he might be scared of Chen Chulian. Don't mind Chen. He keeps a straight face like your dad, but he's not a bad person. But Tong didn't feel the same, because his dad might look icy. But he's incredibly gentle with him, patiently teaching him to read and bringing him his favorite hawthorn snacks. In the car, Liang gazed warmly at Tong sleeping like a little pig. He didn't wake him when they got out, but carried him gently to his room and tucked him in carefully. As he stepped out, he saw the assistant's report on Shen Tingwei. Minutes later, Liang drove to another of his villas. The assistant followed. He's in the guest room on the second floor. His lab shows several hormone levels way above normal. We don't know why yet, but he definitely didn't drink, and there's no sign of meds. Liang pushed open the bedroom door. Shen Tingwei lay asleep on the bed, his long lashes faintly trembling, face still fever flushed. The assistant took his temperature again, 38.7. We ran all the standard tests, just a regular fever. We started IV fluids before you came, and the doctor wants to observe tonight. If the fever stays till tomorrow, we'll do a full workup at the hospital. Liang nodded and sent the assistant home. Once the door closed, he went to the bed, glanced at Shen Tingwei's shut eyes, and said coldly, drop the act. He'd barely finished when the man opened his eyes. Shen Tingwei's heat surged again. He begged helplessly for Liang and finally realized people in this world have no pheromones. He hadn't wanted to fake sleep. He just couldn't face his ridiculous behavior last night. He looked away, embarrassed. Liang gave him a casual look, went over and picked up the ID card by the wardrobe, and went speechless seeing Omega listed under gender. Is this your gig badge for hustling? Shen Tingwei blinked confused. Ha! Liang dropped the topic. He told him, since you're awake, get up. Slowly, sat up, remembering he'd collapsed on the street. And now Liang was in front of him. So he ducked his head and whispered, thank you. Liang glanced at his torn shabby clothes and left with, change and come out. When Shen Tingwei undressed, his collar grazed the heated gland at his nape, and a tormenting tingle swept over him. So he leaned on the headboard, waiting out the discomfort. Liang waited a long time in the living room before the man came down, at ease, and he tipped his chin, signaling him to sit. Shen Tingwei sat on the single sofa, awkward, gripping his pants tight, feet tucked in, restless. To Liang the whole act looked calculated and tacky. Liang frowned. What do you want? Shen Tingwei hadn't processed it yet. When he heard cash or a project, even a fool would get what that meant. And his hands clenched hard as he rasped, Mr. Liang, you've got it wrong. I'm not a rent boy. Liang suddenly laughed, mockery all over his face. Then what are you? Popped some pills and went trolling on the street. Shen Tingwei pressed his lips at a loss. This world was bizarre, but maybe the man in front of him had answers. After a long pause, he asked anyway, Fat Day, what was that scent on you? When the reply was cologne, he couldn't wrap his head around it, and pressed on. Aren't you a beta? Liang burst out laughing. Did you fry your brain? What is this, a childhood throwback in my place? He naturally assumed. The beta Shen Tingwei meant was that plain flying mouse. Shen Tingwei realized Liang beta wasn't his beta at all. And pharmacies here don't carry inhibitors. People here don't have pheromones. And everything here felt strange, unreal. The more he tried to make sense of it, the messier his head got. Then the familiar heat crawled up from the back of his neck again. And Liang suddenly caught a strong scent of alcohol, making him wonder, what's up with your body? Why do you smell like booze? Shen Tingwei's breathing turned heavy, face flushed as he looked at him, and blurted, let's get under the covers and talk. The sudden tease made Liang pause, thinking this one wasn't simple. Crying and fussing last night, now shameless enough to say that. He stepped in, caging Shen Tingwei against the sofa. Are you drunk on men?